What's up, everyone? It's Matt from Surf City TCG here with a brand new video series for you. I recently reached 500 subscribers. As a thank you to all my fans and all the people who have supported me along the way, I'm here today with the first video in a new series on how to build a commander deck from scratch. This has been by far the most requested topic that I've received. I've thought long and hard about how to best present this, but I'm definitely open and welcome any and all feedback, so please let me know if I missed anything at the end. I've decided to build an Edgar Markov deck, in case you didn't already figure that out from the background image here. This is in honor of the upcoming release of Innistrad Remastered and because vampires are sweet. So I think it's pretty important before you even start building a deck, to figure out what the vision of your deck is. Like, what is your goal? What is your budget? Some big picture ideas that are really important to decide ahead of time. So that all being said, the power level goal of my deck is going to be 7 to 8. This is equivalent to like a mid to high powered deck. I'm going to link below and in the video description an infographic that was made by someone on Reddit that I feel like does a pretty good job of estimating what the power levels are and what they mean, because I know there's a lot of like confusion about this. Wizards hasn't yet stated what they believe this will be. I think they will in the future, but they haven't done it yet. So anyway, the goal, take a look at that infographic and then understand that the goal of this deck and almost all decks I build is shooting for around a power level 7 to 8, which are mid to high powered decks, but not CEDH, like a couple steps below CEDH. I intend to be playing with no infinites, no fast mana, and few to no tutors. And, trying to play on theme cards whenever possible, but generally running a lot of staples. These should be like consistent, good performing decks, but not ones that are seeking to necessarily run the exact same game plan every single game. I'll also be building this particular deck without using a budget at all, so I'm going to just be choosing the cards that I feel like are the best for achieving this power level goal. But if there's enough interest, I will post a follow-up video on how to build a deck, maybe even this exact same deck, on a specific budget, because I know that is a topic that is of a lot of interest to some people. So let me know in the comments if that's something that you're really wanting to see, and I'll cover that in a future video. In today's video, I'll be covering the following topics. Number one is going to be the deck building resources that I use regularly and that I will be using in this video. The primary four are, for one, Moxfield. There are a lot of deck building sites out there. I'm not sponsored by Moxfield. It's just the one that I have always used and that I prefer to use and that I will be using for this video. Number two is Scryfall. This is a very powerful search engine, something like Google for Magic cards. There are a lot of powerful ways you can refine your searches using Scryfall, and I'll be covering some of those in the video today. And there are a lot of integrations that already exist with Moxfield, so we'll be covering those as well. The third resource that I use commonly is EDHrec. EDHrec is a data aggregator that pulls deck lists from all over the internet, from tons of different places, and aggregates all of that data into bite-sized information that's really useful for us when looking at a specific commander, seeing the popularity of commanders, seeing the popularity of cards in any given commander deck based on what most people are using. You can even refine it to say, like, I only want certain budgets, or I want to see only decks that include or exclude a certain card. So it's a very powerful tool that can really help us shortcut a lot of the work that we might have to do otherwise. And then the last one that I use regularly is called managathering.com. This is a great site for finding all of the best lands for your deck. So it's going to give you all of the different types of dual lands that are legal in the format that you're looking for and or the colors that you're looking for. I'm also going to show you guys how to find this info on Moxfield using deck packages that you can either create yourself or subscribe to. So I'm going to show you a couple different ways to find the lands that you need and that you want. And then we're going to talk about how to balance your mana base using those lands and based on what colors are already in your deck. Next thing I'll be covering is actually how to build the deck on Moxfield. We're going to start from scratch. I'm going to start with a brand new account, just like anyone might have if they hadn't already created a Moxfield account. We're going to add all of the custom types and tags that already exist on a lot of my other deck lists, but will not exist currently because this is, again, a brand new account. So I'll be showing you guys how to add all of that. I think that is the single most important thing you can do to improve your deck building is start adding custom types and tags, aka deck categories. This really helps you when you're in the refinement stage of deck building or trying to figure out what to cut. Looking at your custom types and tags can help you get there. And I'm going to talk about like some general deck building templates and other guidelines you can use to decide what to cut and what to keep. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about how to make cuts. So it's sort of going to be covered in those other sections, but we're going to cover it in full at the end because we have to get that number down to 100 cards somehow, right? So I'm going to be talking about how to do that. And that'll be it for this video. In future videos on this series, I'm going to cover goldfishing / mulligans practice hands for this deck. So we got it down to 100. Let's run some practice hands. Let's see if we need to make any changes based on those practice hands. Once we feel confident with the deck list, we're going to jump into a first game on Spell Table. And then I'm immediately after that game going to do some game analysis and discussion. So we want to like think about what happened in the game, whether we won or lost doesn't matter. It's what happened in the game, what went well, what didn't go well, what cards performed, what cards didn't perform, where did we feel like we had weaknesses, and like how can we make adjustments and refinements to the deck based on that game. And then we're going to probably run through that same process in a couple more videos and then wrap it up with a like, okay, well, what now? Are we happy with how the deck's performing? Do we want to revisit the original subjects of like, what's the goal of this deck? Did the goal of the deck change after the first couple of games? Because that's going to happen all the time, right? So that's pretty much it. This is going to be a long form video, so please utilize the timestamps to jump around to the sections that will be most useful for you, or just watch the whole thing because there'll be tons of useful tidbits scattered all over the place. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it. And if you are enjoying my content, please like, subscribe, and even better is share this video with your friends if they're not already subscribed. That's really helpful for me to help grow the channel. Let's get started. Right, so here we are on www.moxfield.com. I just created a new account. So very first thing I'd always recommend is jump into account settings. I'm not going to go through every one of these, but I will tell you the two that I'd recommend you look at. I recommend you look at all of them, but the ones that I would look at immediately are pricing and affiliates. This can help you figure out like the prices of cards and you could set it to the one where in which you prefer to buy with. I personally like TCG players, so we're going to move that up. Third Kingdom and Star City can be next, and these ones, whatever, it doesn't matter really. Only the top one is the most relevant. So that is done. We'll go back. Then I'm going to go to decks. Here you can choose the style that you prefer. I'm going to go with text. We're going to keep these sortings like this by default, but I am going to add mana cost and price because I do like to see that information personally. And then let's just look through these things. I like static. I find it distracting if it's animated, but if you don't, feel free to leave that. These don't matter. All right, everything else looks good, so I'm going to save that. And then we're going to start our deck. So we're going to hit the plus button right here. This is, again, a brand new account. I don't have any types and tags. I don't have any decks already built. If I did, I can look in here and find my existing decks, but help, I need decks. Let's create one. Okay, so let's start off not with name, but like who's our commander. So let's put Edgar. Say I don't know how to spell Markov. It's okay. This was enough. So that's the one I want. Now I'm going to name the deck. Often I'll just copy the commander name and paste it here. And then I'm going to put Sir City TCG deck guide. Okay. I already identified the format as commander. Open advanced options. We'll set the visibility to unlisted for now. This means that people can see it if they have the link, but it's not going to like show up in my deck list yet. And then I don't have any existing deck lists, so I'm just going to start from scratch and hit create. All right, so here we are. This is what things look like to start. Let's cover the resources that I'm going to be using real quick. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because we will dive into them in more detail. All right, the first one is Scryfall, www.scryfall.com. This is the Magic the Gathering search engine that we're going to be using to find cards that we're looking for. And we're actually going to use a add-on to Scryfall, which is called the Scryfall Tagger, to find specific types of cards. We'll cover that in a later section. EDHrec, I mentioned in the intro, this is a data aggregator. So if we type in, it's going to show us the top commanders. It can like show us the top cards, the saltiest cards, all sorts of interesting stuff. So really fun website to explore. The best way to start is to type the commander you're interested in and see what it has to show you. And then you could select these various like baked in filters if you want, right? Just to see cards that are relevant to the style of deck you're looking to build. And then you've got your advanced deck filters here, which can really help you refine cards you're seeing. For example, like if you're running a blue deck, but you don't want to see any decks that contain Thassa's Oracle because you're not looking to win that way, you can say, well, I want to show only decks that do not include Thassa's Oracle. That way, a lot of times decks with Thassa's Oracle will be built in a certain way to combo with that card. So therefore, excluding this particular card will give us more of what we're looking for. But since Thassa's Oracle is a blue card, not really relevant here, I just wanted to illustrate how the deck filters can work. You can also, add all sorts of other filters, like I only want to see decks that have more than 30 creatures. I only want to see decks that are below $100. Like there's tons of stuff you can do with EDHrec. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over all the stuff you can do with this, but if there is enough interest, I will create a separate video on like how to use all aspects of EDHrec because that is a really helpful tool for your deck building and conceptualizing. All right, and then the last resource that I love using is managathering.com. This is going to show you all of the existing dual lands for every color combination, every tricolor combination, every format. This is going to be a super, super useful tool for you. Yeah, just like tons of useful stuff on this website. So highly recommend you check that one out. And those are the 4 primary resources I'm going to be using. So that all being said, we get started. Let's talk about what the commander does before we get into any discussion about what to add. So Edgar Markov is a 6 mana vampire knight. He's 3 colorless, a red, a white, and a black. This color combination, by the way, is called Mardu, red, white, and black. So he's 3 and Mardu for a 4/4 vampire knight. He's got Eminence. This is a famously broken mechanic from Magic for commanders only. So basically what it means is it works whether he's in the command zone or in play. He doesn't have to be in play for this ability to function. It says whenever you cast another vampire spell, so he's a vampire spell, but he doesn't trigger himself. Whenever you cast another vampire spell, if he's in the command zone or on the battlefield, you'll create a 1/1 vampire creature token. So he basically says anytime you cast a vampire, you're going to create a 1/1 vampire. And that's why he's so powerful. Like, you don't need to have him in play. There are going to be many games where you never play him at all. His power lies solely in that eminence ability. That's not to say that he is bad. There will be games where you're kind of flooded or you just don't have enough gas and you do want to get him on the field. But he's not that great a value for how much he costs. So really the power comes with that eminence ability. So what do we get if we do play him? He's a 4/4 first strike haste, so he can attack right away as soon as you drop him. And whenever he does attack, he puts a +1 counter on each vampire you control. So he immediately becomes a 5/5 attacker, and he makes your entire board bigger as well. So very good ability and very powerful. But you don't necessarily have to ever play him in the course of a game to win the game. you're going to get most of your value just from that eminence ability. So now understanding what he does and how he works, I think what we're looking for when building an Edgar deck, at least what the way I'm intending to build it, is in an aristocrat style. And what that means is aristocrats are creatures that benefit or complement sacrificing creatures or creating a lot of tokens, either by pinging everyone for damage when those tokens enter or when they die, or getting some sort of other benefit from creatures dying or being sacrificed. So that is a theme that is very prominent when it comes to vampires, when it comes to Orzhov, which is white-black color, same with red-black, same with red-white. I mean, red-white, not quite as much, but really white-black and red-black often involve aristocrat strategies, sacrificing creatures, and making token creatures. So the themes that we're going to be focusing on when building this deck and when looking through the recommendations are, is this a vampire spell? Number one, because we want most, if not all of our spells to be vampires, so we can create a 1/1 token every time we cast a vampire, right? So we really want to minimize the number of non-vampire spells in the deck. And then is this card helping us with that strategy of like either hurting everyone when a token is made, amplifying token making, or something to do with token making? Is there some sort of synergy? Is there synergy with sacrificing creatures? Is there synergy with creatures dying? And is this helping us with our overall strategy, which involves like swarming the board with a bunch of creatures and, just trying to kill people through combat and through creatures entering and or dying. So now that we understand the overall goal of this deck and, the motifs and whatnot, the first thing you can do is look for an existing deck list and, find one you like and build from there. So if you wanted to do that, I went to Moxfield Home here. I can go to advanced and I can say, right, I want to see Edgar Markov decks. Okay. And I want to see, let's just start off with that. We're not going to add any filters. I guess we can say Commander because I don't think Edgar Markov is really played in any other formats besides Commander, but why not just add that? It can't hurt. Okay. And then it's showing us over 1,000 results. So how do we parse this? I think I'd go to this sort and I would say, let's just see the most viewed deck list. Not everyone always drops a like, which sucks when you're a content creator. So please drop me a like if you haven't already. So I like to look at most views. And then I think we want to avoid ones that say something like CEDH, but something that said optimized like this, we could take a look at. And I probably want to avoid any that like this one, which is over 4 years old. This might just be the pre-con deck list. Um, you know, we're not going to end up using one of these, but if you wanted to, you can take a look at one of these and say, like, does this sort of look like the kind of deck I want to build? And if so, maybe I can just go to duplicate and then use this as a template, like a starting point, and then make changes from there. But that's not what we're going to do today. We're going to start from scratch. So I will show you how I do that. And it really involves this button right here that says EDHrec. What this is an API that connects Moxfield with EDHrec, and it takes whatever you've got in your deck and it says, okay, I'm going to compare this to all existing Edgar Markov decks, and I'm going to show you the cards most commonly played in all of the decks that already exist. Now, if I click this right now, it's not going to work. I'll show you because the deck contains no cards, so it doesn't have anything to work with. So the first thing we have to do is add a couple of cards. So stuff we know we want to play. If you literally have no idea, you can start with EDHrec and just look at like the high synergy cards and say, okay, Cordial Vampire, this is definitely a card I want in this deck. Blood Artist, this is definitely a card I want in this deck. So I'm just going to go ahead and add those two cards to start. I'm going to put Cordial Vampire I'm going to put Flutter. Okay. So now we have a couple of cards added in the deck. We know what the commander does. We know what sorts of things we're looking for. Are we ready to dive into the recommendations yet, Matt? Well, not quite. Just one more quick thing. And the reason I'm spending so much time before we actually start looking at potential cards to add is, in general, what's going to happen when you go through this process is you're going to end up with too many cards in the deck, and you're going to have to cut stuff down. So if you can get ahead of that a little bit by being a little more selective about what you add in the first place, you're going to find you'll have an easier time in the end. It's If you have never built a magic deck, you won't know this, but if you have, it's quite obvious that it's way, way harder to cut stuff from your deck than it is to add new stuff. So if we can end up in a situation where we need to add a couple of cards versus needing to cut several, that would be better. But honestly, I'm not expecting that to happen. Almost every deck I build ends up with like 150 cards, maybe not quite that many, but quite a lot. And then I have to cut tons and tons of cards, and that's always painful. So that is, an essential part of the deck building process is like going through those learnings, but just be warned, it's tough. So, all right, let's dive into it. We're going to click the EDHrec button, let it do its magic, and it's going to say, okay, here are what I think are all the cards that you want to add to the deck. I am going to try to use my experience and knowledge to be selective about what I add, and I'll talk about when I decide to skip a card and why. So we're going to have to just go through and read each one of these and talk about whether or not we want to add them. And if we're not sure what we're going to do, so let's say like we read Stromkirk Captain and said, this seems good, but I'm just not quite sure. What we can do is click on options and add it to our considering section so that we can add it to the main deck later if we decide we want it. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll put stuff in considering and then I'll go and add it. I start off by only adding the stuff I really, really want in the main deck. And then the sideboard, personally, I often use this for cards that I want in the deck but don't necessarily own yet. So like I know I don't have this in my collection, but I intend to purchase one on TCG Player or from my local game store or whatever. And as soon as I do get it, I'm going to swap out something that I have in the main deck. So that's personally how I use these sections. If you want to do it the same way I do. So Stromkirk Captain, this is an Anthem effect. It also gives First Strike, which is a very powerful ability. I think, normally Anthem effects I'm not super high on, but in an Edgar Markov deck, it's a little bit different because you're making a 1/1 every time you cast a vampire. So I think having Anthem effects and ways to pump your board is extra powerful. So I'd say yes, let's get him in. Captivating Vampire. This is another Anthem effect. It's still only 3 mana, and we have this really cool other ability where we can tap a bunch of untapped vampires to gain control of the creature and make it a vampire. The great thing about this ability is it doesn't require the creatures to have haste. You can tap stuff with Summoning Sickness because they're not the ones doing the tapping. Captivating Vampire is tapping them as part of his cost. So this is a very good one. We're going to add that. Seeing the price here, like if I was building on a budget, which I already mentioned I'm not going to be doing for this video, this might be one that I considered not including because it's a little pricey, but it's a very good card. All right, so Stab. This is a cheap piece of removal, which is nice, but we're in a 3-color deck. We're going to end up having options of tons and tons of ultra good and powerful removal pieces. And I simply don't think that this one is good enough. I don't know why it's so high in the recommendations, but this is one that we're definitely going to skip over, given that we're seeking to build an optimized and powerful deck list. This is simply not good enough. Right. We've got a 2 mana 1/3 when it attacks. This seems a little weak to me. I suspect that this is not going to make the cut. I also suspect that like these are both from Foundations, so maybe they're just high on the list because EDHrec recommends them highly, given that they're like new cards. But we could put this in considering, but I don't even think it's going to make the cut from there, but let's go ahead and just put it in considering just in case we find ourselves needing more 2-drops. All right, so we've got a 4 mana that says whenever a vampire attacks, you drain everyone for 1. That seems quite good. Legion Lieutenant. So just an Anthem effect on a 2 mana 2/2 vampire seems great. Right? This is a very powerful one, can pump our entire board. 1-drops are going to be very important for us because we really want to make sure playing on curve with this deck, because if we miss a turn 1 play, that means we aren't making that 1/1 vampire. And 1-drops are extra good because you're not always going to draw the perfect hand. So having a 1 mana card that can fill in a slot, like if you find yourself not being able to play perfectly on curve, like let's say on turn 3, you only have a 2-drop in your hand, having a 1-drop to go with it is really powerful. So definitely we're going to put a little bit of a premium on 1-drops. We're going to play ones that might not necessarily make the cut otherwise, just to make sure our curve looks good. All right, so this allows us to sack another creature. So again, it hits that sacrifice motif, so that's good. And if we do, we get to basically Dark Ritual. We make 3 black. Again, this is a 1-drop. Seems very good. I think we get it in. All right, we've got a draw engine. That's also a vampire. Yes, please. All right, so Bloodthirsty Conqueror. We'll go ahead and put this in now. It's definitely very good. It does lend to a specific infinite combo with, there are actually a lot of different cards it goes infinite with. Here's one of them. So I don't want to play both of these because it does create an infinite that we can't necessarily control unless we decline to play one of them. So I think we need to end up deciding if we want to play either Bloodthirsty Conqueror plus Exquisite Blood, or the other half, which is whenever you gain life, an opponent loses that much life. And I think there are a lot of cards like Veto that we're also going to be wanting to play. So I think we're going to lean more towards this side of things. We'll put this in considering for now. If I decide that this is just a better option than all of the Veto style cards, I might end up swapping it in. But I don't intend to play both because I don't want any infinites in this deck. So we'll add Veto because he's really good. He's a vampire and he's kind of a win con. He can give all of your stuff lifelink and then kind of make you, it kind of like doubles the damage of your attackers in a way. All right, Bloodline Keeper's a great one. It's a 3/3 flyer by default, and then it can tap to make 2/2 flyers, which is great. And it should be quite easy to transform, right? If we control 5 or more vampires, it makes 2 right away, 1 from cast, 1 from Edgar's Eminence ability. And then what do we get if we flip it? It's a 5/5 flyer that pumps all of our vampires by 2, and it still has the ability to tap to make a vampire. So this card seems excellent. I think we're jamming it in there. Cruel Celebrant. Cruel Celebrant. This is a classic aristocrat like card, so it's going in. Charismatic Conqueror is a great one. It's basically a stacks piece. You won't often be making the 1/1 vampire tokens. That's okay. Really, we're just playing him as a 2/2 vigilance that causes all of our opponent's artifacts and creatures to come in tapped. And then occasionally they're going to be like, no, I want my Soul Ring used right away. In which case you'll make a 1/1 vampire with lifelink, which is very good for this deck. So this card is excellent, especially in this deck. All right, Alenda. She says whenever a creature dies, we talked about that in the intro. We want stuff that benefits when creatures die because we're going to be doing a lot of sacrificing of creatures. We're going to be making a ton of tokens. Alenda's going to be excellent. All right, Swamp, sure. We'll just add this, just so EDHrec stops recommending them. I like to add the basics. I might have even done this first. Command Tower, certainly want it. All right, what about this land? It's a colorless land, so I'm a little hesitant. If we're playing cards like Cruel Celebrant, drawing a colorless land could be pretty bad for us. So what do we get for it? We can pay 1 life to add 1 mana of any color, but only for vampires. Okay, that seems good. And we could also pay 5 tap to make a blood token, and this costs 1 less for each vampire we control. So I think this is definitely good enough. Blood tokens are not super useful, but this is basically a land that can make any color. We're not going to have too many non-vampire spells. It comes in untapped, which is very important. And I think the blood token benefit pushes it over the edge for us. If it didn't have that, definitely wouldn't be worth it. It is on theme with the deck and it gets a couple bonus points for that reason, but I wouldn't do it just for that. I think the blood token can be useful for us if we're like flooding out and drawing a lot of lands. It can help us like push through that a little bit. All right, Malekith Bloodwish. This is basically the Gary, aka Grey Merchant of Asphodel for vampires. This is going to be one of, if not like the best card in the deck. So definitely going in. Soul Ring. All right, Edgar Charm. Definitely on theme, right? So bonus points. 4 mana 4/4 for a Lord. Not good enough. But what do we get? When he dies, he returns transformed as his coffin. Pretty clever. At the beginning of your upkeep, you create a 1/1 white and black vampire with lifelink. And this thing gets a bloodline counter. And then if there are 3 or more. Okay, so after 3 turns, so it gets a counter every upkeep, and then once it gets the third counter, those are removed, and he flips back over into himself again. So pretty cool flavor. He becomes this like vampire, this little token temporarily, like his ghost or his vessel or something. And then he slowly regenerates in his coffin, and then boom, he's back. So, given that it's so persistent, given that it has death benefits, given that it's flavorful, I think we say yes. This is a card I could see cutting, even though it's sad to do so. Like, it could end up getting cut, and that's sad. But in fact, I'm going to have some restraint here and put this directly into consideration. We're going to thank ourselves for doing this later. Watch. All right, Drana. 2/3 flying for a strike. Good stats for 3 mana. When she deals damage, you put a +1 on each attacking creature. Yes, please. Very powerful card. All right, another Lord. We don't really need tons of Lords. Lord. But this one has Convoke, which is pretty cool. That means we can tap our tokens that have Summoning Sickness to help cast this. And that's pretty big. Like, we can basically cast this for free a lot of times. It also has Madness. So, Madness, in case you're not sure what that means, is a trigger that goes on the stack if you were to discard this card. So, let's say we made a blood token with Voldaren Estate, and then we sacrifice that blood token to discard a card and then draw a card. If we discarded Markov Baron, the Madness trigger would go on the stack and allow us to cast it. So it basically is like we didn't discard it. So we still get to draw the card from discarding, the blood token, activating the blood token. But instead of this going to the graveyard, we get to cast it for its madness cost, which happens to be the same as its regular cost. So this is an extremely good card and has some synergy with discard. So we're not going to focus too much on discard, but there may be some cards that just have natural discard built in when it comes to these colors and when it comes to vampires, as we see with Voldaren Estate. So let's get that added. All right, Claveleno, First of the Blessed. So 3 mana, 3 mana is going to be, it almost always ends up being the glut. Like, you'll end up with too many 3-drops. So I just want to warn you in advance that if you see a 3-drop and you're like on the fence about it, just put it in considering and you probably won't end up being able to make room for it. That being said, I don't know what this guy does. I just wanted to talk about that now. So whenever you attack, doesn't have to be with him when it says those words, just those 3. Target attacking vampire that's not a demon becomes a demon, and it gains when this dies, you create a 4/3 black vampire demon flying. So it basically incubates all of, well, not all, one at a time. You're attacking vampires. It like possesses them, so to speak, so that when they die, you draw a card. So this is a draw engine. It's also kind of like protection because it turns all, protects you from board wipes by like making it so that your creatures die into other things, which are 4/3 flyers. This card seems very good. I've played against it as a commander and it's been great. Seems excellent in this deck. I think this is definitely an include. All right, Skull Clamp, easy include. One of the most broken cards in Commander. Not going to spend a ton of time on it. We're making a bunch of 1/1 tokens. Probably the best card in the deck. All right, Elinda, new Elinda. What does she do? 4 mana, 4/4, lifelink, hexproof from instance. Hexproof from instance is very powerful protection, like even better than Ward, I'd say. Significantly better. I mean, sorceries can still get her, but I think people put a pretty high premium on instant speed removal, so she kind of plays on that and makes them feel a little punished for only running instants. As long as you're as long as your life total is greater than your starting life total, so if you're at 41 or higher, she gets +1/+1 and has menace. She gets an additional +5 if you're at 50 or more. Okay, so she's a life gain like benefit. She's not good enough. Um, Being a 4-drop, we're not focusing on life gain. She's not going to make the cut, so we're going to skip her. All right, this looks like a one-sided board wipe, and yes, please. So -X, where X number of vampires you control to all non-vampires. Yeah, this is a game winner right here. All right, Arcane Signet. So mana and ramp, obviously very important in most commander decks. We do want to be careful about building this deck because there are a couple considerations here. So first of all, what colors is this deck? We're white, red, and black. So we don't have green, so artifact mana is typically at a much higher premium in a non-green deck. So I would say like before you just auto-include Arcane Signet, let's just think about it. I think we're going to end up adding it just to be clear, but I want to be thoughtful about the mana we're adding because this is an extremely aggressive deck. So spending a card to speed us up in terms of mana is not necessarily always what we want to be doing. If we think about how we want this deck to play out and how games will go, we might realize that like people are either going to have a visceral immediate reaction to Edgar in the first place because he's just an infamous commander. He's very powerful, his eminence ability is very strong, and I think you'll find when playing this deck, you're going to end up being the default arch enemy. Even if you haven't done anything particularly scary, people are just a little bit scared of this deck because it is very powerful and it just pops off very easily. So, that being said, do we want to lean into that and just be like, yeah, I'm the arch enemy, bitches, like, come and get me? If so, I think the way to win games quickly with an aggressive deck, it's not easy, by the way. Like, everyone's at 40 life to start. If the game turns into a 3v1, you might just find yourself dead before you know it. Or if you get hit with like one or two board wipes and you're out of cards, that could be really devastating for this deck. So when considering playing something like Arcane Signet, we have to ask ourselves, like, do we really want to replace our turn two play with this? Because a lot of decks are just trying to like speed up their commander. Like if you're playing a 4-drop commander that you just want your commander to be in play as soon as possible, then Arcane Signet's a no-brainer, right? Because you're happy to give up your turn two to accelerate your turn four by a turn. In this deck, though, we're not looking to speed out anything. Rushing out a 4-drop is not the way we want to play. We really want to be playing a 1-drop, playing a 2-drop, playing a 3-drop, playing a 4-drop. Because each time we play a vampire, we're making another vampire. And spending a card, losing some card advantage to accelerate our mana is not necessarily the way we're going to win. So I don't even know if we're going to end up playing this, and this is going to be an important decision. We don't have to decide right now, but this is something we're going to have to decide on by the time we finalize the deck list. So I think we'll default to adding Arcane Signet. Any other mana rocks I see, I might just put in considering for now, and we'll circle back on this decision a little bit later. Hopefully that makes sense. I think playing a lot of mana and ramp is very important in almost all commander decks, but there are some, and this is one of them, where it's not quite such an obvious decision. So hopefully that makes sense. If you're a little confused about that concept, let me know in the comments and we can speak more about it. All right, this is just a 1/1 Death Touch lifelink for 1. Let's add it. This is a card we could end up cutting if we have enough 1-drops later. Like we want like good 1-drops, like Viscerous here is a very good one. So sack outlet for only 1 mana, excellent, right? If we have enough 1-drops, I don't know how many exactly we want, like what enough means. We'll figure that out later. Let's just add these for now. We can always cut it later. All right, this is a 2-drop. It's a 2/2 with Menace, not good enough, just that. When it enters, if an opponent lost life this turn, we go +1 counter on each other vampire we control. That seems good. And as long as an opponent lost life this turn, every vampire enters with an additional 1/1 counter. Okay, so it's like an Anthem / Lord effect, but it gives counters, which is better in general, because if your Lord dies, then you lose the benefit of it, but that's not true with this card, so let's get that in. Swords is, usually an auto include in white decks. This is one of the only decks where I'm slightly hesitant about it because the life gain is not irrelevant for this deck. We are looking to win by pinging everyone down. So, Swords to Plowshares on a 12/12 creature, that 12 life our opponent is gaining is not inconsequential. Games with Edgar are often going to come down to winning or losing depending on less than 10 life. That being said, Swords is probably just good enough anyway, but we will decide later when we see what other removal options that we have. All right, Mavrin Fane. Whenever one or more non-token vampires attack, create a 1/1. So you only get one. Doesn't matter if you're attacking more than one player. Sometimes it'll say like something like whenever one or more non-token vampires attack a player, that way you can get like one per opponent you attack. He doesn't say that. He just says you make a 1/1 every turn with lifelink. Sorry, Mavrin, I don't think you're good enough. I'm going to put it in considering just in case, but I don't think you're going to end up making the cut. All right, Twilight Prophet's a draw engine, so it's a 2/4 with flying that you're basically going to draw a card on every upkeep. If you have the City's Blessing, which it's trivially easy to get the City's Blessing in an Edgar deck, because again, every vampire you're casting makes a 1/1. So the City's Blessing is if you control at any point 10 or more permanents, it's going to happen by like turn 3 in this deck a lot of times. So we will assume for this deck that we will have the City's Blessing. So what do we get? It's a 4-mana 2/4 with flying that draws this card every turn and pings everyone for some small amount of damage. The mana curve of this deck is going to be fairly low. So I'd say the average mana value is going to be like 2 to 3, probably closer to 2. So given that the deck is going to be like the third land, this is going to do maybe, 1 to 2 damage on average. And we really don't get the benefit of it until the following turn. It's a like high visibility threat in that, people don't like just a draw engine sitting on the board. I'd say this is going to go in considering. We might end up adding it, but I don't know if it's good enough. Right, it's 5 mana, so better be good. Sweet art. When it enters, you draw X and lose X for X number of vampires you control. Hell yeah. That is sick. So that's like on cast, right? Let's double check. I'm going to hit this toggle deck preview, right? On cast, right, of him, we make a 1/1. So he's automatically, even if everything else dies, he's automatically going to draw you 2 and you lose 2. But a lot of times it's going to be like draw 7, lose 7, draw 10, lose 10. Are we scared of losing 10 if we get to draw 10? If you said yes or even hesitated, rethink your worry about you can't play this deck scared. Now, you know, I'm not saying to be foolish and squander your life or anything, but drawing 10, losing 10 should be like, yes, give me. Like, no question. You should easily be able to win or make up the life you paid by drawing 10 cards. And the sooner you accept that, the better player you're going to end up being. Okay, we're going to put this in considering because it's the same effect as the Blood Lord, whatever he's called, from above, the Conqueror. Path of Ancestry. This is a good one to talk about. So, Path of Ancestry is, it comes in every precon. It's typically decent in tribal decks. I am very much on the camp of no tap lands. You should have an extremely good land to have it come in tap. Like a good example, in my opinion, not for these colors, but I just want to give you an example of a kind of tap land that I'm willing to play. Number one, the Surveil lands. Those are good enough because they're fetchable and because they do something very powerful. It can really help you early game. Number two, something like Mosswort Bridge, where you're going to have an extremely powerful, like impactful spell that you can play for free at some point. That's the kind of tap land that's worth playing. This land, I don't think we're going to play it. As I mentioned earlier, it's extremely important. Like, of course, we're playing tons of vampires, so we're going to get a lot of scries. It might be worth it. I'm really on the fence about this. Please weigh in with your opinion on Path of Ancestry and Edgar Markov deck. I think there are definitely arguments both ways, but being forced to drop this on turn one denies us a one drop and a 1/1 vampire. So is it worth it to be able to scry on every vampire cast in exchange for losing our one drop and 1/1 token on turn one? I don't know. I'm going to put this in considering for now. I think that in general, that will not be worth it for us. Three Tree City. Easy. So good in this deck. Oh my god. Absolutely nuts. And he's amazing. Yes. Patron the Vein. Um, Patron the Vein, probably good enough. The fact that it gives +1 counters to everything, the fact that it has a replacement effect, this can really hose some opponents if they're like relying on death triggers. Oh, sorry, I misread. They do get their death trigger because it says whenever a creature dies, this is a trigger, right? It's not a replacement effect. So something like Dothy Voidwalker is a replacement effect because it says if a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. So that word instead is really the key that indicates a replacement effect. This says the word whenever. This indicates a triggered ability. So what that means is if your opponent has a Solemn Simulacrum, for example, they will get their death trigger. So when it dies, they'll get to draw their card, but then Patron of the Vein will exile it, and you'll put a +1 counter on each vampire you control. So this is worse than a replacement effect like Dothy Voidwalker, but it's still better than nothing. Like exiling their Solemn Simulacrum will prevent them from reanimating it later, or someone else reanimating it, or whatever. So this is still good. It's just not quite as good as something like Dothy Voidwalker. So the question is 6 mana for destroy a creature plus this effect worth it? I'd say probably not normally, but the fact that we also get to put a +1 counter on each vampire we control whenever a creature an opponent controls dies doesn't have to be from this effect. I think that pushes it over the top a little bit. So I think Patron of the Vein, you probably make the cut, but I could see cutting this if the deck turns out to be really like streamlined and optimized because we probably just don't want a 6 drop. I mean, playing Edgar on turn 6 is not terrible, and he sort of does something similar, right? He pumps all our vampires, so then this becomes like, well, is it worth playing a 6 drop that's going to gum up our hand early when we have a 6 drop we can play every game? That's like automatically in the command zone, right? So hopefully that makes sense. The one thing I want to talk about with Eminence is that it only functions if it's in the command zone or in play. What this means is if your opponents have bounce effects, like Cyclonic Rift or Otawara Soaring City, and they're able to bounce your Edgar to your hand because you played it, that's really bad for you. It's like huge tempo hit because when it's in your hand, you Eminence is turned off, and that means you have to replay it for 6 mana, and that's really detrimental. So keep that in mind if you're playing against an Eminence deck, and keep that in mind when you're playing the Eminence deck. Like, be cautious about playing Edgar, because if he gets bounced or, exiled under something and you don't want to send it to the command zone, that Eminence ability is turned off. And, that is a point in favor of a card like Patron of the Vein, because we want to be cautious about when we play Edgar, because it opens us up to some counterplay. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, we're going to add the Shocklands for sure. They're excellent. Forerunner of the Legion. So it looks like a Vampire Tutor. 3 mana for a tutor to the top of our library, and a small pump effect that's temporary. This is probably not good enough. It's card disadvantage in that the card goes on top of your library. I mean, it's not disadvantage, but you're having to play this card, which is a 3-drop that's under rate. I think you're not going to make the cut unless we decide that there's some vampire that we really need to tutor for, then we might consider him. Right, unclaimed territory. Um, I don't know about these lands. It's going to depend on how many non-vampire spells we have. Obviously, if our deck is all vampires, then this is just great. But we're never going to be able to use this to cast a Swords to Plowshares. So that's the danger of a card like this. Let's go ahead and add it for now. I'm going to put it in considering. I think that given that this is going to be a fully optimized deck list, we might be able to just play enough other good lands that we don't need this. That being said, if you're building on a budget at all, then this land's going to be a slam dunk. You should just play it. But if you have no budget, or you're playing proxies or whatever, then you probably have better options than this. New Blood. Sorcery for 4. And we have to tap and untap vampires an additional cost. But we gain control of any creature and change it into a vampire. Interesting. So it's 4 mana for their best creature that becomes a vampire. Seems probably quite good, especially if we steal a commander that locks them from being able to replay it. It's really bad for them. This is basically like a removal spell and a creature in one. So you can almost look at this like a Ravenous Chupacabra, which is like 4 mana, enters, destroy a creature, but you're also getting, instead of a 2/2, you're getting a whatever that creature is, and it's a vampire, which matters a lot to us. So I think this is worth it. The cost of tapping an untapped vampire should be easy to pay, given that we're probably always going to have a 1/1 that was Summoning Sickness, or that came in after our combat phase. I think this card ends up being worth it. All right, Bloodletter is an absolutely insane card. We're going to play it. We're not on a budget, so we're playing it. You want to see pay to win logic? This card. Rakashare is a 3 mana 2/2. All your vampires add counters to themselves when they hit a player. Let's put that in considering. I think it's probably good enough, but I don't have a lot of experience with this deck, so this might be a card where we need to test it and just see if it's worth it. It also will depend on how many 3-drops we already have. Like I mentioned earlier, 3-drops are a dime a dozen, so we really want to make sure that they're extra, extra good before we add them. All right, Sanguine Bond, I don't think we're going to play this. It's just not good enough when you're not playing the combo. All right, we've got a 1-drop. That's just a 1/2. It gets bigger if a player lost 4 or more life each turn, which is going to happen frequently with this deck. We're very aggressive. And then that pump ability is, pretty useless. We're probably never going to use that. So the question is, do we want a 1/2 that gets a +1 counter anytime a player lost 4 or more life on our end steps, not every end step? Maybe. Let's begin considering for now. If we need more 1-drops, maybe. But I think, I'd probably prefer to play Vampire of the Dire Moon just as a 1/1 death touch that we can leave back as a blocker because, although we're an aggressive deck, sometimes if it's like, especially if it's like 3v1, which will happen sometimes, having a 1/1 back as a blocker that has Death Touch can be enough to stave off like three players' attacks. So I think a card like this is deceptively powerful. Look how strong something like Baleful Strix is. Of course, that draws you a card when it enters and it has flying, but still, I think this card is better than it looks. All right, Banner of Kinship is a slam dunk in this deck. English Unmaking, I don't know. You're going to go in considering for now. I'd say, like, relative to most decks, Edgar, we want to focus more on our game plan than being reactive. Anguish Unmaking is a great card. There's no question about it. But I think the way we're going to deal with problematic permanents oftentimes is by killing the player who controls those permanents. So if we have that mentality, it's like, I don't know if you guys play chess, but I'm an avid chess player. I'm not great, but play a lot. And it's like, I watch a YouTube content creator called named Daniel Narodivsky. He's a grandmaster, and he talks about something called gambit mentality, which is like when you're playing chess and you're playing a gambit, which is a strategy in which you're like giving up some you're giving up some material or some equity or some positional advantage in order to gain some sort of either positional advantage or like angle of attack or something. So when you're playing a gambit, it's important to really lean into that gambit, because if you start playing a gambit and then all of a sudden you switch gears and start playing a little bit defensively, then you've given up all of the equity that you've sought to gain by starting with that gambit mentality. So this is how I like to think of an aggressive deck in Commander as well. Like, you're playing an aggressive deck, you really need to lean into it. The same is true for like attacking a player for one on turn one. A lot of players will say like, "Well, I don't want to make any enemies," but if you're playing this deck, you're making a bunch of 1/1s. That one life can matter. You should be attacking a player. You shouldn't feel bad about it. You're playing a game. Get over it and just do it. You know what makes me feel bad is not when people attack me, it's when people don't attack me. I get much more upset about that because then I don't feel like I won if I ended up winning because they pulled some punches, and I don't want that. So, anyway, circling back to Anguished Unmaking, I don't think it makes the cut in this deck, probably, because we want to be focusing on our proactive game plan and not worrying about playing a reactive card like this. That being said, we do need some answers to stuff that's just going to stop us in our tracks. I just don't know if this is the one answer that, not one, if this is one of the answers that we want. It could be, and we'll look back at this later once we see what other removal we're packing and what threats are likely to stop us and how we deal with them. All right, these check lands are very good if your land base is not 100% optimal, which again, I'm assuming ours will be. So I'm not going to add this for now. But if you're building on any sort of budget, if you don't have fetch lands, if you don't have the original dual lands, you're going to want this in your deck. It's good enough, unless your deck is perfect. All right, this dude. What does he do? I know he was banned in Pioneer or something. So he's 3 mana, 4 loyalty, so you can give a creature death touch, lifelink, and a +1 counter. You could sack a vampire to deal 3 and gain 3, so lightning helix. That's pretty good. And then you can -3 to put a vampire into play. So that -3 is what made him so strong, and I think it's Pioneer. Because people were dropping in Vein Ripper. We're not always going to have something so powerful to drop in that we want to spend a card to cheat something out. I'd rather just be playing a 3-drop. That being said, his both of his plus abilities are pretty good. I just don't think they're quite good enough. Like, if that +1 made a token and then gave it like +1 counter lifelink death touch, then I think that could be good enough. He's not technically a vampire spell, also, which means we're giving up a token by playing him. I think he's not good enough, but I'm going to put him in considering just in case. All right, Teferi's protection is going to be good enough. It's extremely good. Even in a deck like this, even though we don't want to be playing a lot of reactive cards, Teferi's protection just does too much. All right, we've got Baron Bertram. He's a vampire 4-drop. Whenever a token enters, we create another token, but only once each turn. So he basically is like another of our commander's effects. And then he has a pretty bad sack outlet. It's 2 mana to sack a creature or artifact, draw a card. Doesn't quite seem good enough. I'm going to put him in considering, but I don't expect this to make the cut. This is exactly like unclaimed territory, so see my previous comments. Please add it if you don't have the perfect mana base and don't own all the duels, all the fetch lands. If that's the case, this is going to be good enough, but we're going to be building a completely optimal mat base, which probably won't need this. I will put in considering just so I remember it exists. Okay, Herald Sworn, let's talk about this card. So normally in a tribal deck, kindred deck, Herald Sworn is the best of these effects. There's really only two, I think, that are like this, like Herald's Horn and Vanquisher's Splatter. Herald's Horn is normally the better one because cost reduction is very good. But as I discussed earlier, mana rocks and cost reduction and all that, not nearly as important in this deck as it is in almost any other deck. And if this was guaranteed to draw us a card every turn, maybe, but I simply don't think this is going to be good enough in this deck because you're at least going to hit a land a third of the time. And then, even if our deck's 50 vampires, it's still only 50-50 to draw a card every turn. And the benefit of getting our vampires one cheaper is probably not worth the cost of a card. And we would have to spend our very precious 3-drop on this, right? So if we played this, it means we weren't playing our best 3-drop potentially. Just not going to be good enough. So by Triumph, I don't like the Triumphs. Again, I'm not going to caveat this anymore after this. I'm talking about the most optimal mana bases. I don't like the Triumphs and I almost never play them except maybe one or two in a 5-color deck. But in an aggressive 3-color deck, never playing this card ever. All right. 2 mana 2/2. When it attacks, you can sack a creature to draw a card, and then draw a card, and this creature can't be blocked this turn. No. Patchwork Banner, not good enough. We don't need a mana rock for this bad anthem effect. Vanquisher's better. Um, I'm going to put this in the maybes. I don't think it's going to make it, but you know, if it wasn't on cast, if it was on a vampire entering like Kindred Discovery, like I'd say definitely. But this is probably not going to make the cut. All right, these Battle Bond lands are excellent. They'll probably make the cut. Probably. Cavern of Souls 100%. When this creature or another creature dies. Okay, so it's like a Blood Artist, but only for your stuff. That could be good enough. Put it in considering. This card's not going to be good enough. The other one might be good enough, the new version of this. As long as it's a vampire. We'll probably stumble up on it later. Path is probably good enough. This is one of the only decks where I would play Path over Swords. Swords is almost always the better card, I'd say in like 95% of decks, but since this deck is so aggressive and cares about our opponent's life so much, I think I prefer Path in this deck. And we really are going to place a high premium on very cheap removal because we don't want to be spending a lot of our time playing a reactive card. But we do need to deal with a very problematic creature that is just totally stopping us in our tracks. See something like Peacekeeper. All right, Shared Animosity is a very like powerful finisher sort of card. Like Our attacking creatures get +1/+1 for each other attacking creature that shares a type. So it's kind of like Coat of Arms, but it doesn't pump their toughness. If we've got like 5, it only cares about attackers. So if we had 5 attackers, they'd all get +4/+4. Mm, I just feel like we can get this sort, maybe not quite as good, but we can get this kind of like Anthem pump effect on a vampire, which is what we really want. We don't want to be playing non-vampire spells, but it's possible this is good enough. We'll have to come back to it. All right, this is a 3-mana 3/2. You can sack a creature when this enters, and if we get to destroy a non-land permanent. So this is exactly the kind of card I want to play in a deck like this, compared to something like Anguish Unmaking. Yes, this is not an instant, but it makes us a 1/1 vampire. It's a 3-drop, it's a 3/2. This is where we want to be when it comes to removal. This sort of effect. This is great. Yeah, we have to lose a 1/1, but he makes a 1/1 to replace it. So basically, this is a 3/2 with an Anguished Unmaking untouched, where we don't lose 3 life, but it's not an instant. Right, and one is on our upkeep, everyone sacks a non-vampire. Very powerful, and it's great that it's one-sided. Um, I don't know. I just don't know if it's good enough. It's gonna eat removal every time, you know? Like you have to, it has to stick around till your upkeep. Just seems like a heavy investment. 5 mana, it's only a 4/3. If it had flying, I'd say yes, for sure. But this is just like begging to be removed. So I don't know about this card. Anointed Procession. Um, let's add it for now. I don't know if this is good enough in this deck. It costs us our whole turn. It's a like priority removal. Your opponents will spend their removal on this if they have it. And even if it does survive, like, what are we getting out of it? We're making an extra 1/1 on every vampire cast, but we gave up at least a 1/1 to cast this. So we already have to make that one up. The question is, like, how many other kinds of tokens are we making? Are we making a bunch of treasure somehow? Are we making, like, other tokens? If so, I'm going to just put this in considering for now. I don't know if this is really what we want to be doing. It's obviously an extremely good card in a lot of decks. I just don't know if it's right for this deck. Obviously, we're not playing Nomad Outpost. I don't put this in any deck, even a budget deck. I don't find it to be worth it. Maybe like the most budget deck, but definitely not this deck. We're definitely playing all of the on-color fetch lands. I'd say like in the most optimized deck list, we would play every fetch land we can, which in a 3-color deck is going to be 9 out of 10 of them. But we'll decide later whether or not we're going to do that. This we're not playing that. Urborg is a maybe. It's very good, but it can really help our opponents, and it might not be worth it for us in the most optimized mana base. I doubt we're going to play Cabal Coffers in this deck. We just don't need to, and it's too risky if we draw it and we don't have the Urborg, and we don't really want to spend slots on ways to find Cabal Coffers because it's not that important for this deck. I'd rather, in fact, I'm almost certainly not going to run Urborg because we can get the colors we need without issue, and we don't want to help our opponents. Ojigabog. Um, probably not. Let's put it in considering. I think we're not as worried about graveyard plans because we're just going to try to kill them before a graveyard strategy will beat us down with their inevitability. I think if it's the point in the game where a graveyard deck is starting to be problematic for us, we've already lost if we've reached that point in the game. This deck needs to come out fast and come out hard and win. Otherwise, like the value decks that are focusing on ramping and focusing on card advantage are gonna overtake us on average. Now we're gonna try to play some like big finishers that like prevent them from stabilizing, but in general, I don't think we want to play a land that enters tapped just to potentially turn off a strategy that we should be beating before it becomes a problem, if that makes sense. The inner pair is nuts. It's going in. I don't really want to play tutors, but like, given that this is Vampiric Tutor, I think we're probably going to run it because it's just too perfect. And obviously, it's insanely good. Like, I'm not saying tutors are bad. Please don't misunderstand me. I just don't like playing them because they make the decks feel too much the same a lot of times. Like, I won't be adding Demonic Tutors to this deck, but if you really just want the deck to be as powerful as it can be, you should absolutely be playing Vampiric Tutor, Demonic Tutor, Enlightened Tutor, Gamble. Um, Even Tainted Pact is really, really good. Like, even if you're not comboing with it, it's just a very good card. Imperial Seal, Beseech the Mirror. These are all worth playing if you only care about your deck being as powerful as it can be. But I'm only running Vampiric Tutor because it says Vampire in the name. The Pain lands are not going to make the cut. We have better options. All right, we have a 5-drop, 5/3 flying when it attacks. When a non-token creature dies, draw a card. That's pretty good. Obviously, we have a lot of tokens, but we do have a lot of non-tokens, and this sees any creature dying, not just ours. Let's put this in the maybes. You know, we only have room for a few 5-drops. I'd say like we probably want, somewhere between 5 and 10 5-drops. So it's going to depend on how the curve looks. So we'll just put in a considering. Demonic Tutor, we're not going to play. Resolve Signet, we're not going to play. If we wanted more mana rocks, the best ones are the talismans. After Arcane Signet, of course. Arcane Signet is the best. The talismans are the second best because they can make either color. The signets are great, but they can gum you up sometimes. For example, like on turn 3, a lot of times, or sorry, on turn 2, a lot of times, like you want to play a talisman or play a mana rock and then play a 1-drop. You can't do that with the signets. And that's the big problem with them. Legion's Landing is there's no there I don't think there's a more perfect deck for this card, so we're certainly playing it. It flips into a land, so this ramps us without like costing us tempo because we get a 1/1 for one. And then it flips into a land that we probably won't use this ability, but we might use it like once a game. Really good card. Good card in like any white deck. Extra good in this deck. This card is just so powerful that it's worth it, even though it's not a vampire. All right, Florian. I like Florian. Let's see if he's good enough for this deck. He's a 3/3 first strike for 3. On our second main, we look at the top X, where X is the amount of life our opponents have lost this turn. We exile one of them, and we can play it that turn. So he's a draw engine. That's a vampire. Hell yes. Very good card. Under Underplayed, underappreciated card for sure. Really good one. Yes, please. Blade of the Blood Chief is nuts. Door of Destinies. I don't think this card makes the cut, but it might. Let's put it in considering. All right, Butcher of Malik here is very good, but are we getting to 7? And if so, is this what we want? So with a sack outlet on board like Viscerous here, a free sack outlet, this basically turns all of our tokens into a sacrifice removal effect. I think Butcher makes the cut, but it is on the fence. And it is going to depend on how many natural sack outlets we have in the deck. Because just dropping him on 7 and hoping that your creatures die some other way or that you untap with him, that is not good enough. So the only way this ends up being good enough is if we can reliably count on having a free sack outlet in play when he comes down. All right, the Nighthawk Scavenger is the better one that I was talking about earlier. I think that he makes the cut. He's just very efficient. He's got lifelink, which is great. And he's on average going to be like a 6 or 7 powered flyer for 3 mana. He's just really good. Phyrexian Tower. I think this makes the cut because we have so much sacrifice fodder. And it is another like free sack outlet for Butcher, so I think Tower is good enough. If this card wasn't double black, I would be much higher on it, like much more like willing to consider it as a like slam dunk because I think it's good enough as a 2 drop. I'm just worried about games where we don't draw the perfect mana and we miss playing our 2 drop because it was double black, but let's just put it in consideration for now. Drawing Vigilant Ball is a 4 mana 3/4 flying vigilance, turns off all activated abilities of our opponent's creatures. That's huge. Means their mana dorks can't mana, they're just dorks. And then it gains all activated abilities, which yeah, who knows what that will do for you. It can be a lot of stuff. And it has vigilance, so you can attack with it and use those abilities. I think this card is really good, and we're definitely at it. All right, so that was it. Like that's the bottom of our results. But look what it said. These were based on our deck, so try again as it changes. This was based on our deck before we added all of these cards.